This video world, I am Syed SHABAHAT and you are watching Faultlines. Pakistan's economy is still one of the major concerns for Pakistan's people and also for the government of Pakistan. With the recent tranche of IMF, while the major macroeconomic challenges have been addressed partially, Pakistan's economy does not look completely out of woods. And I'm saying so because of the devaluation that still remains unchecked and also because of the soaring energy prices that haunt the people of the country. The new government that has recently taken guards are facing all these challenges. Some areas of this economic challenges can be addressed by the new government, but for remaining areas, there needs to be a long-term government with a lot of political commitment. So we need to understand what of it can be done in a short term and which areas of concern have to be addressed in long term. Team Faultlines have prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
Pakistan's economy has faced several challenges in recent times, including devastating floods last year and commodity price hikes following the war in Ukraine. The country witnessed a promising ray of hope after navigating challenging economic situation as the country secured critical $3 billion standby arrangements with the IMF. The staff level agreement not only averted default but also gave a much-needed roadmap for an economy in severe distress. The former parliament approved the financial year 2024 budget in line with the goals of supporting fiscal sustainability and mobilizing revenue, which will enable greater social and development spending. In its latest Asian Development Outlook, ADB has said Pakistan's economic growth in the previous fiscal year was weighed down by tighter monetary and fiscal policies pursued by a coalition government to safeguard macroeconomic stability. Pakistan's caretaker government faces daunting challenges in maintaining ensuring economic stability and pursuing development path of former coalition government. The caretaker Prime Minister Anwarul Haque vowed to continue economic policies of the PDM government and said work on public welfare projects would continue and the government would ensure the provision of international quality facilities in health and education sectors. A comprehensive set of homegrown structural reforms are needed for Pakistan to escape from the vicious cycle of high budget and balance of payments deficits, slow growth, low savings, rising indebtedness, and soaring inflation.
Ladies and gentlemen, my first guest in the show is Dr. Nasir Iqbal. Dr. Nasir Iqbal is one of the leading economists in the country. He's head of SYED's Macro Policy Lab. SYED is Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. He's working for the last 15 years on various socio-economic issues. He's wrote many op-eds and is frequently published in many leading newspapers. Dr. Nasir, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much.
Doctor, first things first. So, what is the current economic outlook, and do you believe Pakistan's economy is completely out of woods as yet?
If we look into the economic outlook of the country, then you have to look into the few figures. Like first, what is economic growth? The economic growth is minus. What is inflation? We have around like a historical high inflation around 30%. What is unemployment? We have a massive unemployment of over 8%. So if we look into these figures, that gives you the picture where we are and whether we can claim that we are out of the crisis. No. Despite having some injection from IMF, from other friendly countries, though we are in a situation of some sort of stability in terms of moving ahead, but the real problems are there. We have to think deeply and we have to think about the structural reforms that really needed to come out of this whole crisis.
What are the immediate challenges, Doctor, for the current government that has recently taken guards? Which areas do you believe they need to address immediately?
You know, the first priority of this caretaker government should be to announce the election date. Whatever the date, we are not asking about, it could be around 60 days, it could be 90 days, it could be 120 days, it could be one. But first and the prime duty of this government to actually create a certainty in the system that when the election would happen, that would be the underlying factor. And now we talk about what are the key initiatives that this government need to focus. First, to me, is that this government should make sure that they follow the path that the previous government gave it to them. Like the key thing is to continuation of this IMF program. It is fundamental for us in terms of moving ahead, because it shows your credibility, it shows your policy continuity, that look, this interim government is moving in the right direction. So the first priority of this government should be to make sure that they implement this IMF program in true spirit. The second, to me, is the expenditure management. What is expenditure management? If you look into the previous government around, you can find that there are 80 to 90 different minister, advisors, so many things that create a lot of burden to the government size. So this government makes sure that they keep a check on the number of ministers, only appoint a highly important minister where they are required, thus not moving ahead and there and keeping so many ministers. So thus make sure that they keep this government size in check and make sure the only expenditure they incur, those are really needed to the functioning of the government. The next task for this government is to do not intervene in terms of making abrupt changes in the taxation system, though if they have the leverage to streamline the taxation system, to ensure that they can reduce the transaction cost, they can reduce the documentation processes, to make sure that the FBR would collect their taxes as per the agreed agreement. Then the next would, this government make sure that they didn't intervene in the function of the state bank or the central bank, because one of the condition of the IMF is that the central bank should move independently or take decision independently. The next key element for this government is to make sure that they can take a small step in terms of making a structural adjustment, whether in terms of removing unnecessary documentation, whether in terms of moving toward the more like privatization processes, whether toward the rationalization of the energy tariffs. So these are the small steps. Maybe they can intervene in terms of reforming the civil servant structure of the government and also other things like that. But the idea is that if they have enough time, they can look into those areas where the normally political government feels shy.
And you mentioned a lot of skepticism about IMF's program as well. So, what are these conditionalities of IMF, and are we so far on track with the conditions that have been set forth by IMF?
You know, if we look into the history, like we have around 23, 25 different programs with the IMF, normally after one or two tranches, when we feel we are in a comfortable position, we go back to the political economy of the country. Even if we look into the previous regime, when there was a known government over there and they finally completed one of the IMF program, but suddenly after when there was a last year, they go back to the same political cycle. So that's why I'm worried about, like, the credibility is important for us. If you look into the note that issued by the IMF, they, the important words is the faithfully implementation of these reforms. Why they put this clause or the key word in their document? Because there is a lack of trust, there is a trust element among the creditor and the government of Pakistan due to the reversal of the policies, due to the sudden change in the various policies. So we should, whatever the commitment we gave to the international community, we must follow those commitments. That would be the underlying factor in terms of getting the confidence of the international community, especially from the EU countries.
Dr. Shab, rupees devaluation is one of the major areas where the government is a lot of concern, and that is also an area of concern for the macroeconomic managers of the country. Do you believe it's a matter of perception? Are you happy with the inflows that Pakistan is receiving from abroad?
Yeah, as I earlier said, the credibility matters a lot in terms of creating a market perception. The dollar game basically linked with the market. So if there is uncertainty in the political system that's currently is there, so no one knows when would be the next election, how long this government would be, and if we are assuming something for 3 months, then the totally approach would be different. If we are assuming next 1 year or 6 months, then the approach would be different. So market behave on the basic certainty. So what cost we are paying this certainty is lack of investment either from the domestic investor or the foreign investor. That create a huge pressure on the foreign exchange. So we don't have any alternative rather than to create a stable environment, a friendly environment for investor that would help to ultimately push or the induce or encourage the market to basically make some sort of investment. Maybe at this that would also help to increase our export margin in the sector where we have a potential. It might encourage the diaspora or the migrant workers, those are working in other nation, like they spend like dollar to us, because if you look into the past trend over the last 1 year, there is a significant decline in the remittances. Why there is a decline in remittances? The fundamental reason is lack of certainty in our system, because they don't believe on these hodgepodge policies. They don't even trust on the current government. So that would lead to uncertainty in the mind of those people. So if we are looking for a stable macroeconomic environment, if we are looking for the market where the market would actually invest, we need to create a certainty in the system.
Doctor, what are the critical conditions set forth by IMF? And when we talk about these conditions, do you believe these conditions will help Pakistan's economy to improve?
When we talk about the IMF, there is a political narrative behind this IMF. Whenever we have an agreement with the IMF, we celebrate it, that there is something coming out from the IMF. It also encourages other friendly country. It also smooth in the process of getting loan from IFS. So this is the political narrative, and of course there are some conditions behind these loans and something like that. But as an economic perspective, we can't say that the IMF would be our solution. Why we feel it's a solution? It's a political narrative. That IMF never be a solution for us. IMF is just like an injection. If you are dying, you need a quick, like some sort of remedial measure, and that IMF is provide you in term of injection. So it will give you some leverage that you can stand, you can take appropriate measure that will help you to address your structural issues. What are the demands by IMF? IMF basically looking for, you have to maintain your fiscal deficit, you have to maintain your energy circular debt, you have to maintain, allow the market to determine the exchange rate. These are conditions are fundamental to us as well. They are not like imposed by the IMF. These are fundamental to us. We have to follow these conditions to make sure that we have to address our chronic issue of circular debt. We have to address this instability in the exchange rate market by allowing the market to work. We have to address our fiscal deficit by meeting by curtailing our expenditure. This is not the requirement of even the IMF. It's our own duty to make sure that we can take all these measures. So I'm not saying that the IMF conditions are very rigid. We can always negotiate with them if we have a good plan B. What is our good plan B? We have no plan B. Then what is easy solution for us? Just follow the condition of the IMF. That's what we are doing. That never be a solution, and we can't say, and no one can claim that these IMF injection would help us to address our chronic issues.
The fuel prices are also rising sharply. Every fortnightly, we are seeing a change in the fuel prices. Are we completely at the mercy of demand and supply forces? Is there anything that you believe the government can do about it?
Yeah, it's very, I earlier said it's always easy to blame others. So it's very easy for us. And as a nation, it's our habit to blame others. Like, though the international prices are there, every country facing international price phenomena, the market is free. So the prices can be set based on the demand and supply condition. It's not new for us. It's not even for only us. Our issues are different. It is easy for us to blame that we are increasing these prices due to the international pressure because there is an increase in the oil prices of the international market. That is true, because there is a significant appreciation in our dollar rupee that put a pressure on the energy market, but we didn't talk about the real issues. PIDE over the last few years selling that our issues are different in energy sector. We never allowed to develop market. We never rationalize the tariff structure. We always give subsidy in the name of so many things. Why we are providing subsidy to some people and not to other? If the issue is the distribution, then there is a cash transfer program. Those are working well. So we can always give a targeted subsidy from there. And why we are giving a cheap energy to the fuel sector, that create a hurdle. We didn't allow to develop energy markets because there is a monopoly by the fuel sector. We didn't. There is a significant intervention by the government in the energy sector, though to some extent there are necessary, but these are extraordinary intervention in the energy market. If you need additional information, PIDE has done a lot of work on this, how we can rationalize this energy market, how we can solve these chronic issue faces in energy, how we can address the circular debt issue, how we can rationalize our tariff structure, how we can make sure that the pressure from the international would be lesser and lesser to our energy prices. Because currently, if we only believe that this is the international phenomena, it would be very easy to sell the political narrative, but not the economic narrative.
And Dr. Lastly, are we going to reschedule the external debts that Pakistan has? Because we understand that in this financial year, there is a lot that Pakistan's economy has to pay to the external debtors. We do not have enough money in our banks, apparently, the situation that we see through the numbers that are available on the State Bank's website. So, do you believe this is possible for Pakistan? And would you also share the same line of argument or believe in the same line of argument that Ishaq Dar Sahab had for rescheduling of these loans, where he was not in favor of this rescheduling? He thought it's detrimental for the economy.
You know, if you look into the relationship between the IMF and Pakistan, even the other countries like IMF, World Bank, ADB, and also EU countries, they are asked to support, but on the what cost? So they are looking for the credibility in our policy. Rescheduling is, I like economic term, that can be happen. It's not a big issue. It's similar to default, but of course there is a cost to it. The cost is really our credibility, because if we are unable to pay our loan at this point in time, the rescheduling would further increase the cost of taking loan from these countries, because they are demanding. Then definitely in the near future they can demand a higher cost, higher condition, and also so many other restrictions. For us, the solution would be like, we have to deal with the geopolitical situation. We have to work on the sustainability and stability of the policies. If we figure out these 2 points, probably the creditor would allow us to negotiate on these debt conditions. Maybe it could be rescheduling, maybe we can work on alternative financing mode, like there is a current debate on this environmental crisis. As you know, over the last few years, we are suffering of these environmental issues, but we didn't sell this idea to international community effectively, because the issue is our credibility. If we sell this idea to the international community, maybe that give us some leverage, either in terms of rescheduling our debt, either like transferring from one hand to another. And so these are the things that we can negotiate. But for the most and the key thing for us to think in our house, I was just over the last few days thinking about the key point of this charter of prosperity. What does that mean to me? You know, there are 3 fundamental issues to us. One is the struggle between the different stakeholders about the powers. Another is the economic challenges. And the last one is the democratic system. And these 3 are the key things. If we really have to grow, we have to create a balance. We have to create a consensus on these 3 elements. Unless we create a balance, or we create a consensus on these 3, who will own the power, what are the power struggle, where are our boundaries, where are our red lines, how we can run the economic system, whether it's a political decision, whether it's economic decision, how we take like democracy as whether it's a public service delivery or it's a rent seeking. So these are the three things that are crucial, and we are lacking in these three elements.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nasir, for being guest in our program.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will take a break. We'll join you back with second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. One of the major areas of concern for developing economies, including Pakistan, is the international fuel prices. International fuel prices have again started to skyrocket. We don't know whether it is because of some fundamental reasons or are there technical reasons behind that. But certainly, it is one of the major areas of concern for people of our country and including many of the countries of the developing countries. Also, the fact remains that Russian oil, which Pakistan had bought, and the previous government had promised that this will help to reduce the prices of oil, has not been able to reduce the prices of oil. What has happened in this regard? I have invited Osama Rizvi, one of the leading experts on the subject. He is he's an expert of political economy and also an expert who speaks fluently and frequently about the energy market. Osama, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Osama, why the energy prices are again skyrocketing in the international market?
So there are essentially three reasons for this oil price rally, and I've also written about it as well. The first reason and the most important and prominent and significant reason is the prolonged pledges by OPEC plus countries to cut their production levels. The second reason is there was a huge fall in inventory levels recently in the previous few weeks. And the third reason is that the many people have started to believe that the global economy might not be heading toward a recession, and we might pull off what is called in economic terms a soft landing. So all these reasons, one of which is a huge presumption that whether the global economy will enter a recession or not, these three reasons have fed into the oil price rally, which I think is temporary, and we have already seen that oil prices could not pass the point of $90, and they are now hovering around $80 to $85. And I believe that in the coming few months, the markets will readjust their price levels.
These were the fundamental reasons, Osama. Do you find any technical reasons behind it as well? Or is it purely a rally driven on the speculations?
So, as I mentioned, one of the biggest factors in the movement of prices internationally of any markets, let's say oil markets, is the sentiments, right? So, the market as a whole has a certain sentiment at a certain point in time. Right now, the sentiment seems to be very bullish, to use the economic terms. Everyone is thinking, to repeat myself, that the global economy might not be headed towards a recession. So things can change very quickly if there is a news that confirms the contrary view. As of now, the big hedge funds, they take a lot of positions and they trade oil contracts, right? So recently, a lot of hedge funds have gathered more positions because of the change in sentiment. That has also fueled the oil price rally because everyone has now started to think that, okay, there might not be a recession. Hedge funds are buying oil, so we should also buy oil. This is what is called a classic feedback loop, right? So at the moment, there is an over-representativeness of positive news. I believe so. But the fundamentals, if I tell you about the fundamentals, you look at all the global economic indicators, you look at the purchasing manager indices of China, of Eurozone, of United States of America, all of them are below 50. So anything below 50 signifies a contraction. Anything above 50 signifies an expansion in the economy. In fact, Eurozone's PMI, Eurozone's Purchasing Manager Index, touched its 38-month low recently. The case of China is also very important if you want to compare what is happening in reality and what are the sentiments. China is the largest consumer of oil. The Chinese exports recently touched their lowest level in the past 3 years. That is since the beginning of COVID-19. Chinese petrol prices, petrol consumption, Chinese cement sales, Chinese consumer activity, China's business activity, all of them are down to I mean, to a month record down, or different, down in double digits. So we are seeing a significant slowdown across the globe, but it is ironic and surprising that oil prices are heading upwards. That is why I conclude that this is only temporary, this is only based on sentiments, and I think this would turn around very soon.
Rightly mentioned China, Osama, but China is the factory of the world. It's a solid economy. It's one of the largest economies, perhaps one of the two major economies in the world. What about the developing countries who are facing the brunt of these rising petrol prices?
So before I answer the question, we need to understand in what context and in what sort of a global orientation the world economy is right now, and what are the challenges that the developing countries like Pakistan, like Sri Lanka, like Argentina, like other African countries, they after COVID-19 and after Russia-Ukrainian war, they have been facing a certain set of both international and domestic challenges. Both have fed into each other, creating a vicious cycle. Many events that happened in Pakistan would not have happened at all if there was the Russia-Ukrainian war, right? And I speak about all major political events as well. So you see, we emerging markets like Pakistan, they already face a lot of challenges. The biggest challenge is rising inflation. The second biggest challenge is unprecedented amount of debts. The third biggest challenge, which I think, according to my point of view, is an impending food crisis. And nobody here speaks about it, but it is getting quite serious, especially after after the fallout of the Black Sea grain deal. So I think under this context, under this context, if the global oil prices continue to rise, that can only signify, mean quite ill for the global south, for developing countries, for the emerging markets. Because petroleum, crude oil tends to be the most strategic commodity in the world. If the price of oil goes up, the price of everything else goes up as well, even perishables like food items. And in Pakistan, you and I both know that things have been quite shaky since the beginning of the year. And I think a rise in fuel prices is the last thing that we need right now. But unfortunately, and I actually, if I'm not mistaken, I actually said this on your show as well, that petrol prices were poised to touch 300 rupees. They would touch 300 rupees. Now, unfortunately, for a short amount of time, they might even go beyond that. So in such a scenario, you can imagine what will happen to the global to the Pakistan's business environment, to our economic activity, to our interest rates. So that would be quite chaotic for our country if this trend continues to persist.
Now, this was in general about the developing economies. How about Pakistan in particular? What are your fears with regards to Pakistan's economy in the aftermath of these rising prices of the fuel?
So right now, Pakistan is under an IMF program, and what it tends to do is that it imposes a little bit of austerity. That is the last thing we need, but that's of course another debate. But what I'm trying to get at is that under such circumstances, an increasing petrol price can mean can be very chaotic for the business environment. It when petrol prices increase, we need to realize it isn't only petrol. It spills over to other domains as well. If you can't afford petrol, you might shift to natural gas, you might shift to LNG, you might shift to fuel oil, you might shift to coal. So the doing so will increase its price because its demand increases. Also, most of the industries that run on these conventional fossil fuels, they also face a lot of challenges, production challenges. Pakistan's exports are already quite down because of the global economic scenario. We can face serious dent in our export earnings that will also affect our reserves. And a falling reserve level is the most dangerous indicator of a falling currency. If a currency falls, we will be looking at persistent, if not more, levels of inflation, which would exacerbate, which would worsen the current cost of living crisis. And when I'm saying the cost of living crisis gets worse, you will see, and we have already seen this happening. There will be a lot of social issues as well. You will see a rise in protests by teachers, by doctors, by other people. Income levels won't be sufficient, and some of it, unfortunately, I don't find any pleasure in saying that. some of it has already started to happen. So Pakistan is facing a cost of living crisis. In case oil prices remain at this level or edge higher, that would mean a worsening of that cost of living crisis, which would essentially and definitely and subsequently spill over into the social domain and henceforth into the political domain.
Osama, you didn't mention the the energy crisis being a byproduct of the circular debt that we have, the circular debt that we have in the energy sector. Do you see an interconnection between these two elements?
I don't think we have an answer to that, because I do not think that individual households can put up with such an amount of challenge. We have seen unprecedented rise in electricity prices, in gas prices, in petrol prices, of course, in car prices, 160%. But so under this circumstances, I will want to repeat myself, because this is a very serious issue, and IMF actually has written about it as well, that this cost of living crisis, so we shouldn't be just saying that there is inflation, there is this. This is, on the whole, holistically, a cost of living crisis. And when it happens, households have no other way to, I don't know, they would strip down their standard of living. Already, if you look at figures, petrol sales have been down, cement sales have been down in Pakistan, retail sales are down. You see at the textile industry, about 7 million people, right? 7 million people, that is 7 million households, they have been laid off their workforce. Textile alone accounts for 60% of our export earnings. So when I look at the Pakistan's economy, we are facing a slew of challenges. There are external challenges from the external sector of the economy, there are internal challenges. And under these circumstances, if this continues to happen, individual households will suffer a lot. Unemployment can rise, levels of crime activity can rise. We can see a lot of protests, and food. Once again, I really want to highlight this, that Global Hunger Index recently put Pakistan on the 99th number out of 122 countries. Pakistan's level of food insecurity has been compared with 5 other countries, namely Democratic Republic of Congo, uh, other African countries, Afghanistan, and there were 3 other African countries, and it was unimaginable for me, at least, for a country of 240 now million people to have food insecurity as compared to these countries. So the fuel prices, coming back to our point, can just make all of this worse, can intensify this.
And lastly, Osama, I was very desperate to ask you this question. The Russian crude oil has not been able to bring the prices down in Pakistan's market, as was speculated and as was claimed by the outgoing government. What do you believe can be the reason behind that?
So see, this was a very interesting point, actually. So there were lots of, I would say, misplaced hopes when we heard about the first consignment of Russian oil coming to Pakistan. So uh, first of all, I'd like to explain there were a few challenges, right? The first challenge was diplomatic. We had not finalized the IMF program at that point, and I, along with many other observers, were quite cautious or quite concerned about this development, that how IMF would be taking such a thing, such a step, because Pakistan's sovereign space, if you want, if I may use that word, is sort of being affected because of its economic problems. So that was resolved, but however, another matter that wasn't looked at was the technical aspect of this development. You see, there are 2 grades of oil. One is called heavy, and the other one is called light or sweet. One is sour, one is sweet. The oil that we used to get traditionally from our Middle Eastern vendors, like UAE, like Saudi Arabia, that is sweeter than the one we are getting from Russia. What it essentially means is that it has less impurities. Therefore, it is easier for our refineries to refine that. Along with that, we have been getting oil from our Middle Eastern vendors from decades. And so our refineries, their machinery, their processes have been tuned to that oil, to processing that oil. Now, for Russia's oil, you need a totally different sort of refining process. And I don't know when it was given a different spin, but it was categorically, there were reports that only one refinery in Pakistan might be able to process Russian oil. And what happened after? Okay, so somehow we were able to process Russian oil. Then came the second technical aspect. So when oil is refined, there are different products. So Pakistan's major consumption is of high-speed diesel. The Middle Eastern oil that we used to refine used to yield 50% high-speed diesel and 20 to 25% furnace oil, and the rest of the other products. Whereas the Russian oil did the opposite. It yielded 40 to 45% furnace oil and 20 to 25% high-speed diesel. So there was an issue. Even if we were getting cheap oil, it wasn't fulfilling our needs. So they had to mix the Middle Eastern oil in it. Essentially, when you combine both of these oil, when you take into account the freight cost, which was twice or thrice that of what we pay to the United UAE or Saudi Arabia, it meant the same thing. So I always had my doubts whether Russian oil would mean something to us or not. And unfortunately, now it is almost official that there would be no more Russian oil consignments being delivered to Pakistan. I'm hopeful that the $10 billion Saudi refinery under the SIFC, or Pakistan Sovereign Wealth Fund, when and if that is developed, established, then we might be in a position to take advantage of these things. Not before that. There are lots of technical issues and hindrances.
Thank you very much, Osama, for being guest in our show.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll join you with the last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The political pot of African continent is simmering. One after another countries is falling into control of military administrations and democracy is failing in many countries. Many of the critics point out fingers toward France, the former colonial master that still have a lot of influence and a lot of interest in in the Africa's economy and also in the Africa's politics as well. Whether it is France that is responsible or whether the France's interests are still intact in this market, we will discuss this with an expert of African affairs. His name is Claude Gatebuke. He is a reputable author and an expert about the African affairs. Claude, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Claude, first things first. So before I ask you about the main theme of the show, there is a statement by a former Austrian foreign minister. His name is Karin Knassel. And he has argued that France-Afrique is over after France lost to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Would you agree with this statement?
I think France Africa has definitely lost those three countries, and it's going to continue to lose more of Africa's the French zone of influence. And France Afrique, if I can quickly explain it, is basically when we refer to France Afrique, we mean countries that are under the former colonies of France. Some of them aren't, like Guinea-Bissau, but there are former colonies of France that are now doing the bidding for the French on the continent. There are puppet governments for France. By the way, as France is losing its influence in West Africa, it's going south. They have started to enroll countries like Uganda. The president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, is in tight cooperation with the French on oil exploitation. And the Rwandan president in Rwanda, in Central Africa, where Rwandan troops now are serving as mercenaries for the French in Southern Africa, in Mozambique, serving the French. So the French are definitely, to me, as I see it, they are losing France Afrique. And it's because not just the leaders turning to Russia and Turkey and China, but because the people in those countries no longer want to be treated as a colony of France or as an extension of France. That is what's been happening all over West Africa. People are highly disgruntled with the French, and with France's interference in their affairs, with a highly exploitative relationship between France and those countries, that the people are rising and taking a stand. And this has been going for years. And so the leaders that are coming in now, they seem to be aligned with the people's will. Eventually, we'll find out, because you never know. At the very beginning, you always, it's one thing at the beginning and it's another later on. If they don't change and if they align with the people, definitely France Afrique is just about over. And it's only going to go west and south to countries like Senegal and the Ivory Coast, and south to Cameroon and Gabon and the Congo Republic and others, and over to Chad.
And also, the French president Emmanuel Macron has given a statement wherein he has said that the era of French interference in Africa was well over. Why did he need to give this statement? And would you believe in this statement?
Well, this is not unusual. By the way, let me add something. When we talk about the French are the most entrenched in these areas, but also where we see France, it's the West in general. We're talking the European Union, we're talking about the US and things like that. So those countries that you mentioned earlier have had, and others in West Africa, have had both the French influence, but also the US influence. So let's I just want to make sure that this is clear. Now, to your question about why he's saying this now, this is not unusual. This happens all the time. Imperialism and oppression never admits to imperialist practice. They never admit to neocolonialist practice. They do not admit to occupation and exploitation. So the denial is a political speech. This is similar to where we've seen it. Again, the West is very skilled at doing this. And France, of course, Emmanuel Macron is using the same playbook. He's doing it to appease the gullible. Let me put it that way. And people are, at this point, we have seen enough of France's actions and the West's action in Africa that we know that regardless of what they say and what they do are two different things. When they say, for example, that they are investing in those countries, they are actually exploiting those countries. And often they support brutal leaders against the people. So this is more to appeal and appease to the gullible than it actually is of substance. It has not been well over. It's still there. It's still happening. Both French and Western interference in general, Western exploitation and French exploitation of countries on the African continent has been a continuous thing from a long, long time ago. The reliance on natural resources that are found on the continent is all over the globe. I mean, we're talking, for example, in Niger, we're talking about uranium. The uranium there is powering Europe, is providing power in Europe, where they have cut off their power supply from Russia with the Russia-Ukraine war. The cell phones that we all use, the coltan found in the phones that we use is found in places like the Congo. And so there's so many resources on the continent that are being exploited both by the French and by the West in general. And when the French president Emmanuel Macron says that that this is well over, it's incorrect. It's far from the truth.
And how about the recent reduction, the recent reasonable reduction that French president has also announced, a noticeable reduction in France's presence, in the France's military's presence in various parts of Africa? Do you not see it as a positive sign of development?
They've been doing this for a long time. This is not a new thing. The French have been training countries that are, and militaries that are aligned with French interest. Let's take Niger, for example. Right now in Niger, and up until the coup, and even now, there's still French military bases there, as there are to American military bases there, by the way. Um, the French and Western occupation of these countries, of these troops' occupation in these countries, is there. And the training and the funding and in providing resources, this is something that's been going on for a long time. Again, this is not new, but maybe what he's saying is that they're changing their strategy from sending their own troops, maybe that's what they're going to do, and arm these governments who are going to serve as their local mercenary groups. Again, I use the country of Rwanda as an example. Rwandan troops that are under the Rwandan president Paul Kagame are serving as a mercenary group for the French in another African country, in Mozambique, in a town called Cabo Delgado. So this is something that's been happening already, but it's been more covert than overt, and I think what he's saying is now, we will cooperate with you and train you, but we're not going to be there. But that's just a different way of having their own occupational force, which is going to look like the locals.
But the French troops have been withdrawn from Mali, from Burkina Faso, from Niger in year 2022 and 23. Why then all of this is happening?
The countries have actually expelled the French troops. So the countries are fed up, at least the new leadership in these countries and the people in these countries. As you can see, I would love for your audience to take a look, just do a quick search on protest in these countries, in Mali, in Senegal, in Burkina Faso, in Niger. The people, part of their protest is get the French out. And so one of the things that these governments did after the military coups in French West Africa, let me call it that, in Burkina Faso and Mali, was to ask the French troops to leave those countries. The French troops were there supposedly to fight terrorism in those countries. And for 10 years, they were completely inefficient. And so those new governments asked that the French leave. So they're disinvesting because the countries have asked them to leave and because the people do not want them there. And they cannot find a way right now to justify their occupation and presence on the continent. So that's the reason why. It's not because they're now seeing that there's a need to do it. Is because those countries have actually asked for them to leave those countries. Now, I'll add one more thing. We're talking about coups, military coups, but one of the things that's happened a lot on the African continent is what I call constitutional coups. Right now, they're saying that they would like to restore the Nigerian president who was removed in a coup last month to restore constitutional order. But when Western allied presidents, such as the Ivorian president, such as the Ugandan president that I mentioned before, the Rwandan president, and many others, change the constitution. They carry out coups against the constitution in order to maintain themselves in power. When they do that, they do not raise as much of an issue around that. So there is a type of coup. These constitutional coups are actually leading to these military coups in many parts of the continent, and they're leading to protest and disgruntlement. It also happened in Guinea, another former French colony, by a president who is French supported, who was supported by the West, but then he was also removed in a coup. So again, the leaving of French troops from the Sahel, from Mali, from Burkina Faso, is because the people have demanded it and those governments have also demanded it.
So if I understand you correctly, France's interests from Africa are diminishing, but yet not completely over. Is that what you mean?
Their strategic interests are definitely there, and they've admitted it. Their president, former French President Jacques Chirac, said, "Without Africa, France is nothing." France is obviously, they exploit the African countries, especially the 14 countries that use the CFA franc. It's called the franc CFA, which is it's basically controlled by the French central bank. The exploitation of resources, those interests themselves have not diminished. They still need the resources. They need the uranium from Niger. They need the natural gas from Nigeria, which the pipeline goes through Niger. They need they are one of the top producers of chocolate. They need the cocoa from the Ivory Coast. They need so much of the resources on the continent, the various mines in Guinea, in all of these countries. So the interests have not diminished. What has diminished is their influence. What is diminished is how tight they are with those countries in terms of controlling those countries. What has diminished is France's control of those countries, and in turn, the Western control of those countries. Because again, a lot of these places, when we talk about France, it's not France alone. There are other countries that are involved. There's the Portugals, there's the UK, there's the US. A lot of different countries are involved in these places. But again, France's influence is what is diminishing, and also Western influence is diminishing in these countries.
Lastly, Claude, the previous protest that we had seen in France, in Paris, twice at least in last 1 year, had a lot of former African population involved in it. Do you believe it is this anger of Africans that is translating into violent protests in Paris time and again?
Most of the protests in French seem to be related to local issues, except for the recent protest about the shooting of a black person by the police, the killing of a black person by the police in France, that set off a lot of protests in the country. But generally, the protests in France are local issues, and a lot of people in France are unaware. They are now becoming aware of France's role in Africa because of what's happening in Niger and the Sahel region. The protests in Africa, though, are very clear. They want the French out.
Thank you very much, Claude Gatebuke, for being guest in our program today.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Claude Gatebuke, our last guest in the show. Reminds us of the immense opportunities that the African continent has to offer. While France is clearly trying to redefine its relationship, as told by President Emmanuel Macron in his statement, let us also consider the fact that countries like Russia, like Turkey, like China, and even India are considering the immense opportunities offered by this continent and are trying to harness its potential to their fullest. The other countries who are late to the party will not be able to reap the same dividends. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.